Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey there, lovely radicals. Buckle up. It's podcast time again. I hope you had a good week and have managed to squeeze in a little more kindness towards yourself. And I know it's so easy to give that advice to someone else, right? It's the kind of advice, a heartfelt advice, we give our friends and loved ones. Treat yourself kindly, go easy on yourself. But putting that into practice for ourselves, that can be an entirely different story. You probably all heard that great question, what would you tell your best friend in this situation? And it really, really frustrates me to see how ridiculously hard this is to do for myself. It's as if there was an entirely different set of rules for the lovely humans around me, including you, lovely radicals, than there is for me. It makes no sense. And I guess this points to another layer of unresolved issues inside myself right there. And yes, I'm working on that particularly smelly onion. I really do. All I'm saying is that I often don't really know how to really be kind to myself. See, sometimes I think I am being kind to myself, like in the past few days, but turns out I really wasn't. I don't know about your inner gremlin, but mine is a class A trickster. So often what he says or suggests sounds very quite normal and a lot like the truth. You know, the truth that I have been steeped in for so long and the kind of normal that I have grown up with. So sometimes I don't even recognize that I'm falling back into old behavior patterns because my mind makes it out to be completely reasonable and the quote, right thing to do. So it totally happened again and again that my inner gremlin put on that sweet purring voice, convincingly pretending to be my bestie with my best interests at heart, wanting to protect me from, the heartache, the pain, and the betrayal waiting outside in this cruel, cruel world. Then he kind of goes like, hey, I got you. Just do as I say. You'll be A-okay. Now let's get on that elliptical, shall we? Because I really let you pig out yesterday, didn't I? And of course, in my disordered brain, that sounds completely logical and like a good move. If that mechanism sounds familiar to you, then you probably also know how easy it is to forget to actually listen to the body and to that, quote, higher or kinder self, instead of overworking ourselves, over-worrying, over-exercising, overeating, over-restricting, over-criticizing ourselves. And yeah, that totally happened. It went something like this. Here in Switzerland, we've been lucky and we've had unusually high March temperatures this past week. And it was wonderful to see, the first signs of spring. So, of course, my inner voice went, better go out and take a long walk. Some fresh air will do you good, some sunshine too, and some movement can't hurt. Plus, it's too nice not to be out. And we've got some cute little hills around Zurich, so the tours were kind of set. Me being alone, single, and working from home, there's no one saying, hey, I think you're overdoing it. And yep, I conveniently forgot that I had already exercised at home, that my body, tired to begin with, was beat already. Also, I conveniently forgot to feed myself properly during the day, secretly planning my nightly binging. I conveniently denied that my internal calculation system was up and running again, saying that I better make up for these binges that really are a way of numbing out from loneliness and anxiety, and that it's better to be safe than sorry. So while I enjoyed being outside in the sun, and, which is hard to admit, enjoy my nightly binges, I managed to deny that my body was bone tired because I was simply too afraid to let it rest again. Because I'm afraid that when I rest a little longer, my body will finally show me how exhausted it is. And that scares the bejesus out of me for some reason. So I'm often holding on to coping mechanisms that I think I have managed to decode on a rational level, so that I know that they're not really helping and I know what they stand for and why they were developed in the first place. But putting all that knowledge into practice and changing the behaviors that I've been doing for decades, that's another story. I know there's pain underneath that. The smart part of me says, hey, the only way out is through. And the scared part of me says, yeah, I know, maybe tomorrow. So I want to let you know that I've been struggling somewhat and that I feel a little bit like an imposter right now, because here I am, not walking my walk and falling back into some habitual reward and punishment thinking, while I preach to you to be kind to yourself and to see the brilliant essence of your being. And you know, I'm not just saying that, I mean every word. I am convinced that there is a unique, wonderful being underneath all the layers of conditioning in each and every one out there. But I find it hard to apply that to myself. And so, of course, sometimes I feel like I'm failing at recovery. Then I can't help but beat myself up for finding this so hard, for being 44 this year and having spent the better part of my life blind to the fact that I lived like a prisoner in a cell that I am also the guard to, ironically, for not finding my chill button, you know? So, of course, I told my therapist about this and about my inability or seeming inability to let go of some behavioral patterns. And as I sat across from her, I had a sudden outburst of self-shaming, criticizing myself as if there were a price for being hard on oneself. And she said, you will never be able to let those behaviors go if you shame yourself for doing them and shame yourself for not doing them. We have to deal with that part of you that wants to make you feel bad no matter what you do. When you exercise, you feel like you are failing recovery. When you don't exercise, you feel like you are failing at control. Let's take the pressure out a bit. Let's find out what that little girl inside you really needs and what she's trying to hide from. Most of you probably know that I'm working on all kinds of symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I gotta say, working on a past of ongoing trauma is a process that is taking much longer than I would ever have imagined or wished for. It's always easier for me to stay in my head than actually feel the iceberg of pain that is connected to almost 2 decades of childhood stuff that most of us have suffered from to a certain extent. And in my case, it just was unfortunate that everything came together and went on until my mother died. And I'm not blaming her, and I'm not blaming my father. I realized that they were suffering really, really badly themselves, and they did all they could, even though that might seem like not much at all. So the issues I have to face range from neglect to violence, addictions, fires, deaths, abuse, and, which sounds almost harmless in this context, diets and body shame. Sometimes I catch myself and I think, can I be done with that already? And I realize that as lovely as that would be, this process has barely started. I know everything intellectually, I can tell my story, I remember the details, the not so cool details, but I often cannot feel it, hence my behaviors. So ironically, my therapist keeps telling me to take the pressure out, when I want to dig deeper because I want it to be over already, when I want to be whole and fixed again. Because again, that's just my inner gremlin that tells me that I'm taking too long with this. And I quote her. She said, "All you have to do is be kind to yourself. The soul will reveal her wounds when she feels safe, and not any time sooner than that. As long as you keep beating yourself up, we will not see what wants to come out." There's truth in that. Also, you might find this interesting. She suggested that I jot down a few things a day that I feel grateful for or was joyous about in the day. No matter how small a thing that might be, whatever it is, a flower or the fact that my legs carry me or that my eyes are functioning. And so over the past few weeks, she noticed that I never really celebrate my own small victories. Often I don't even recognize them. I surely recognize my failures and my faults and my shortcomings, but, well, so there was one thing that really stuck last week. She, my therapist, said, "It is striking that nothing you ever do or did, you did for winning, for the actual experience. It seems like all your hard work, your dieting, your perfectionism, your exercise habits, your job successes weren't about proving anything to anyone. But really, all it was about was not losing." And suddenly it made sense why all of my successes never really made me feel like pumping my fists or anything like that. Rather, they felt like, thank God I got away this time. So most of my successes, including my so-called victories of rigid dieting and over-exercising, they always felt hollow. Somehow like having been given another day of mercy, like having been given the permission to be here for another day. I wonder if anyone is relating right now, or if you're all thinking, what the hell is she going on about? But it really, really shook me to hear that, to feel the truth of that all it ever was about was not losing face, not losing control, not losing my independence, not losing credibility, not losing the privilege of not being bullied anymore. What a life. So I guess, there's a lot of homework to do still for me. But we all have homework to do, don't we, radicals? So as weird as it sounds, I feel the need to remind you, you are enough. No matter what mood you are in, no matter the circumstances, no matter what your past is, no matter your age, skin color, physical ability, sexuality, gender, no matter your size, you are enough. Just like me, you might not believe yourself when you say it, but maybe you can believe me for today. Maybe. I hope so. And did I say thank you already? No? Gee, thank you, lovely radicals, for listening to me, for writing podcast reviews on iTunes. They really are making my darkest darknesses bright and shiny. And I want to say thank you on behalf of all the people that are more likely to find this message because you, yes you, helped to make this show more visible for others by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. For those who are interested in supporting my podcast with a small financial pledge, please go have a look at my page on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. You can donate as much as you want, and of course you can cancel anytime. And just so you know, this is the kind of love that helps me keep this work up. So thank you from all of the members of our community, really. I'm filled with joy to introduce you to Dan today. Dan is a man who knows exactly what it feels like when you don't want to go to the pool without your shirt on. I know exactly how that feels. And how easily we fall into thinking that our bodies are wrong or a problem, something we need to fix. So here we go. This week on the Life Unrestricted podcast, I'll have a chat with a fellow official body image movement ambassador. It's Dan Lewin from the Sunshine Coast in Australia. Dan is 35 years old and has recently graduated with a Bachelor of Nutrition and Dietetics. And he has started working for a group of specialists, dietitians dedicated to working with clients who are battling eating disorders, disordered eating, and weight and body concerns in general. In all of his work, he uses the principles of health at every size, HAZE, and the non-diet approach. After recently hosting a screening of Embrace, he was accepted as a body image movement global ambassador, just like I am one. And he is very passionate about working with community and raising awareness around body image issues for women as well as men. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Merit.
How are you?
I'm amazing. Hello from Australia. How are you?
It always boggles my mind to talk to people from the other side of the planet.
Right, yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, it is. And what's even more mind-boggling is that it's summer where you are now, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, it is so hot where I am. It's 7 o'clock in the evening and I'm still sweating.
Are you kidding me? Where I am, it's about 0 degrees Celsius. What is it over there?
It's in the low 30s, I think it was today.
I would love to have summer.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I went down to the beach today and it's just, we live in just one of the most beautiful parts of the world here on the Sunshine Coast where I am, and totally grateful, absolutely privileged to live here. It's so beautiful.
Makes me think of my time in Australia. It's a while back, but I sure loved it. And I went there to escape winter here. So I was there for half a year, more than half a year.
Oh,
and
wow.
I loved it. Yeah, so I had like 3 summers in a row. That was lovely. Have you ever been to Switzerland?
I haven't, no. I've travelled a bit around Europe, but not to Switzerland. It's on the list.
Yeah, it's quite a distance away.
It is, yeah. I mean, each occasion that I've come to Europe, I've, stayed for at least 3 months and really travelled around and always just try and go to different places. So, yeah, next time it'll definitely be around Switzerland and Norway and Finland. I'd love to go see the Northern Lights.
Yeah, me too. I haven't seen them either. Maybe you could have a second honeymoon or something.
I wouldn't say no to that, yeah.
Yeah. So that we can all get to know you better, please introduce yourself, Dan, and let my listeners know some of your backstory. And to start that, I would love for you to take us back to the earliest memories you have of being in a body.
Wow. So I guess to start with, I mean, I'm one of 3 children. I've got an older brother and a younger sister. And even from a really early age, I had the classic middle child syndrome. I always felt like I was missing out. And, particularly with my brother, I looked up to him a lot, but I also compared myself to him a lot as well. Whatever he had, I had to have. Mm-hmm. And that included food. So, we have very different bodies, me and my brother. So I started to put on weight really quickly as a youngster, as I strived to keep up with him, basically.
How was the food situation? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know why, but I just always felt like my family didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we weren't deprived. We got fed. We had all of the staples, but I just felt food insecure. And so I remember doing a lot of sneaky eating, even really young, 4 or 5 years old. And I guess, some of that, might have been the, I better eat that or there won't be any left kind of thing.
Get that, yeah.
Yeah. So then by the time, I was in primary school, I was already overweight, in air quotes, right? But, even back then, in the late 80s, there was this whole stigma attached to it. I already stuck out, in the eyes of everyone else at school. And with that started the teasing.
Oh.
And yeah, I remember it got to the point with one kid in particular. He was the older brother of one of my classmates. And it was, the teasing was so bad, I basically walked around with my head held down, essentially trying to be invisible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just trying to escape that situation. And, even interestingly, there was another another boy who was in a larger body, and he basically teased me as well, and I guess that was his way of self-protection, so that all the attention was put on me, and so he wasn't getting teased.
Yeah, I did that as well. I tried to find someone else who was bullied as well and tried to side up with the bullies just so that I would get spared, which was, it's horrifying.
Totally understandable, trying to escape from it, right? Mm-hmm. But I reflect on those things now, and I don't know about you, but, I think, what the fuck? Pardon me, no kid should have to go through that torment. It's torment. We know kids 6 years old these days are still getting, fat shamed, and it's not right.
Even more so, probably. And online as well, with their social media and everything. Must be horrifying.
Yeah, and so the teasing was really damaging to me. And not just from, the school kids, but also from my siblings. I did cop a lot from them. Looking back on it, Merritt, it was probably worse coming from them because they're my family and they're supposed to love me, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was tough. It was mostly my brother, but even when my sister kind of got old enough, because she's 4 years younger than me, when she got old enough to, understand those concepts, she certainly chimed in as well. It's really difficult hearing that from your brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm. So that was your primary school years, right?
That was the primary school years. And then, in high school, during grades 8 to 10, I did what's called the French immersion program. So basically, all of my classes were in French for those few years. And we had our own block at the high school, and we were really cut off from the mainstream classes. So in a sense, we were also cut off from a lot of the derogatory stuff as well. And we were a tight group of friends, and I didn't feel like weight was so much of an issue. But interestingly, thinking about it, there was a teacher we had. She was one of the French teachers, and she was from France, and she always commented about how much she loved cheese. One of the life's pleasures is a good cheese.
Yeah.
But she got called some really nasty names related to her weight. So in actuality, the messages I was getting around weight were still there, that it's not acceptable to be in a bigger body, even though they weren't, directed to me. And then after I finished that program, I went to a different high school for the senior years. And to be honest, I kind of tuned out to what was going on around me, and I just studied. I put my head down. But also my parents had separated and divorced, and it was really quite messy. And, I blocked out a lot of stuff going on around me and, still trying to tap into it. But that's a work in progress.
That's painful.
Yeah, really difficult to experience that at an early age. And, that's also really damaging to come from a broken home when it's messy and not amicable. It's difficult to experience.
Yes, I relate to that. And we somehow block out a lot of stuff. At least I did. I pretended somehow to not have emotions. And for a while that worked well. Like on the outside, I was the one that always powered through and didn't show weakness. And somehow I lived in a more quote unquote masculine way. Trying to,
you're coping so well by holding it all in, but they couldn't really see on the inside.
Yeah. Then what happened after school?
So after school, I actually worked for myself for about 5 years from home. I traded the futures and currency markets, and it was really interesting. In this time, it was very isolating. So for a young guy like me, it was actually pretty depressing. And I actually ate a lot during that time. It wasn't just eating. I actually binged a lot during that time. So I gained a lot of weight.
Because you weren't happy with what you did.
I wasn't happy. I had no social existence, so to speak. And as you know, like humans crave connection. It's so important for us, and I think our souls to connect with other humans. And I'd like lost that. So it's interesting, my mum, she dieted on and off for years, and I always noticed weight changes. She didn't hide her body talk, but there wasn't a lot of it. But she did make comments like, she'd say, you'll do something about your weight when you're ready. So she never put me on a diet, but her words implied there's something wrong with your weight.
And at one point you will have to do something about it.
That's right. And then that point came when I was 21. I weighed myself for the first time in actually many years. I never used to weigh myself regularly. And I saw the figure, and it scared me, because back then I thought weight equals health, all right? I mean, it's not true, but that was instilled in me. So that was the first time I went to a gym. And I was doing other exercise. I was playing basketball. I rode my bike, and I walked a lot at the beach. I loved walking on the beach, but I never swam, and I didn't want to take my shirt off. I didn't have the beach body, so I didn't deserve that.
Yeah.
To put that in context, I grew up on the Gold Coast. So the Gold Coast is famously known for, surfers' paradise and the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a very highly superficial place. And, I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of the eating disorder capitals of Australia today.
Oh, really?
It's all about the beaches, the perfect beach body, the tans, and that look. So I started the gym, and I started the lifestyle diet to go with it.
Yeah.
Starting to lifestyle in air quotes, started to eat well to lose weight. So 18 months later, I was, a normal weight. What's normal? And I was
what's normal?
What's normal, I didn't eat dessert, which I love. I mean, New York baked cheesecake, can't pass that up. But I did. I didn't eat dessert for like 18 months, and obviously just that whole dichotomy of good and bad foods. And it's interesting because after that, I went overseas for 10 months and did some traveling. And that was an amazing experience, getting to see the world. Australia is a beautiful place, but I really love to experience different cultures and see different things, and also languages. I love languages. So, but food-wise, I was restrictive. I mean, here I am traveling the world, but restricting my food. I'm watching what I'm eating, and, I still tried the cultural delicacies. I think that's such a big part of traveling. But then I'd restrict it the next meal or the next day. I was counting calories and become a slave to it.
Yeah, it's so painful how much I can relate to that. Anywhere I went, I took those demons with me, all the time. And I also, by the way, I also went to swim class and to the beach. I mean, beach in air quotes in Switzerland, where we don't have a sea, but, to the swimming pool and everything. And I always went into the water with a T-shirt on, trying to hide, which obviously doesn't work. When you're the only kid who wears a T-shirt, then everybody's staring at you for wearing a T-shirt, which makes you stand out even more. But yeah, that was the thing I tried to do to not get bullied or hassled. So you were like 20-something when you were
like my mid-20s. And after the travel, I moved back to the Gold Coast for a really short period of time. But I knew it wasn't home. I just didn't want to be there. I needed a place with more culture and art. And I also found photography when I was traveling. So I decided to move to Brisbane, which is about an hour from the Gold Coast. And my brother lived there. In Australia, we joke Brisbane and culture. The two words don't really belong in the same sentence,
really?
But
Why?
Better than the Gold Coast. I think cities like Melbourne have just this amazing culture and a lot of art and theatre and plays, and even the food is amazing. But Brisbane tries, but they knock down all of their old beautiful buildings and just put new buildings up. The history is kind of gone. So if I want real culture, my wife and I will go to Melbourne to experience that if we want it in Australia, or even Hobart or like Tasmania. There's some beautiful places with some great history. So, but Brisbane, it's where I met my now amazing wife. And when we first started dating, we did what all couples do. You go out, eat lots of tasty food, and back then my wife didn't know how to cook, so I was doing all of the cooking, and of course I wanted to please her and make all of her favourite foods, which involved lots of potatoes and lots of cheese. So I love these foods too, but we went kind of crazy, and there was definitely no intuitive eating happening in those days, and I started to put weight on again.
How do you mean going crazy with food then?
I guess, like eating to very uncomfortable levels of fullness. For me, that's what it felt like for me. Very large meals of all this kind of rich food as well. So it's interesting because at that point when I started to gain weight again, that's when my body image started to become really negative. And then I took things to the extreme, whereas it didn't affect my wife. And so I actually started like a very highly restrictive eating pattern, and I guess I was just obsessed with getting lean, and ripped. I fell into that cultural desire to look a certain way as it's portrayed for masculinity. And what happened though was I ended up getting lean, but I also lost a lot of muscle tissue, so I was like very gaunt. But the sad thing is I was getting comments, like, oh, you look so great, or if I went to social events and didn't eat any dessert or something, or didn't eat anything at all, which happened, I got comments about how healthy I was being.
Yes, me too, all the time. Like, wow, you have so much discipline and blah, blah, blah. And I was suffering and I didn't allow myself anything because I knew I would go overboard the minute I tasted a brownie.
But the pain inside, they just didn't know,
No.
And again, it's, judging someone by how they look just shows, you don't know what's going on with someone. It was very difficult. And I actually equate those kind of eating behaviors that I had, the preoccupation with food but not eating, or looking at the cookbooks, or thinking how I can change ingredients to reduce the calories or make it healthier, the depressive mood, that's the kind of stuff you read from, like the Minnesota starvation study. And I experienced that. It was crazy. And, at some point, it would have been about 6 to 12 months after I kind of hit that rock bottom feeling totally miserable, that I thought, well, my leanness wasn't good enough because I didn't have muscle. Mm-hmm. So then I bulked up, went to the opposite end of the masculinity that I was really looking for. And I started to gain weight, and I recall feeling better, but it was still actually driven by body image. It wasn't for, my own physical or mental health. All this bulking up and eating more was driven by that social desire to fit in.
Yeah, and that it's not sustainable. In the end, you end up living like a prisoner somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know how to get out of it. And it kind of, the food is one side. And then, I know you talk about your experience with exercise. And, that's another aspect, is that, like, it was maybe about 4 years ago, my exercise, because obviously, you want to get muscly, you go to the gym. And so I did, but I was over-exercising, no doubt about it. I was spending 2.5 hours in the gym, and I said to myself, oh, it's only 3 days a week. I was rationalizing it. It's only 3 days a week. That's all right. But I was punishing myself, Merritt, just lifting really heavy and just training long, and it was just brutal on my body. I would train through injuries. Mm-hmm. I'd started uni. I was training through exams, and nothing stopped me.
Yes.
The food was out of control, and I was just obsessed with this muscular look. And, I was using scales, weighing everything under the sun except for vegetables. Like the calorie counting was just trying to count down to the last calorie, driving myself insane. And of course it's impossible because food labels are out by up to 20%, and all of our bodies process foods differently, metabolize it differently anyway. So,
but the mindset becomes very, very obsessed and very restrictive, and you kind of develop this insane fear of letting go of all this counting, because you somehow convince yourself that the whole world would spin out of control if you did that.
Absolutely. It was a really big fear, and impacting my life in just so many ways.
I wanted to ask you, how did that influence your relationship? Because at the beginning you mentioned that you and your wife had this great time going out and eating and cooking, and all of a sudden her husband kind of turned into someone who was obsessed with exercising and calorie counting. How did she react to that?
She could see it happening, but she didn't know what was happening. It was definitely impacting the social life. We would go for lunch or dinner to her family, and I was always taking a salad, and I'd have some kind of protein that they offered, but I basically didn't touch anything that I didn't know how it was cooked. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is my uni results were excellent, but I actually felt like I was hurting my relationship with my wife. Perfectionism it was taking its toll, and this was my perception of the relationship. It was taking its toll on the relationship and my well-being, and she didn't think there was anything wrong. She didn't verbalize that, but I started to feel that there was a disconnect. I recognized that just, my behaviors around food and exercise, it wasn't right. I knew that I may have looked healthy, but on the inside, I wasn't, because, pardon me, but everything I was doing was just making me fucking miserable. Mm-hmm. I've got to say, like, if you're miserable, something is wrong. I had to break that cycle because I just couldn't tolerate it anymore.
Did someone tell you that, hey, Dan, you're trying to strive for the unattainable, or did you notice yourself?
I mean, I noticed myself that it just, like I said, I mean, it wasn't right. How do you define right? But it was just this, I knew that all these things were happening. It was the conflict between my study and my relationship. And, I was having a little crisis. And basically, like, my uncle, who's a psychiatrist, he says, when you have a crisis, it calls for action. So I had to choose what I valued most, my marriage or my grades, for example. That perfectionism for wanting to get the top marks was impacting on my time away from my wife, and so was the food and the exercise. So, of course, the answer is that my wife is infinitely more important than the grades. And, the perfectionism it's so hard to get out of. Mm-hmm. It's a trap to fall into that's so hard to get out of. And I was lucky while all of this was going on, my dad, who is an amazing businessman, he actually said to me, he said, you can achieve excellence without perfection. I don't know, that saying just it just hit me. So I recognized that the perfectionism is a myth, and the behaviors that I was doing to try and achieve that perfect were unhealthy and self-destructive. And I just started to let go of that constant struggle of trying to be perfect and merit something amazing, like totally awesome happened. Mm-hmm. I actually started to move forward in the areas of my life that perfectionism was a hindrance or worse. And yes, it can be hard sometimes to accept that perfectionism is a myth, that we're imperfect, but it's okay, because in all of that perfectionism, people will still love us for who we are. And it took me years to recognize and accept that was the case. But once I'd started to let go of that perfectionism and realize that people just don't stop loving you because you're not perfect, I was able to, I guess, let go of who I thought I should be and embrace who I am, and actually start to engage in life and live my life and own my story.
That sounds to me like letting go of a deep fear. I think it was Brené Brown that I studied with, but I'm not sure. Someone told me, and it was like, perfectionism is a disguise for fear, because people who are perfectionistic are trying or are fearful that if they don't show up perfect, quote unquote, that they're going to be left behind or not loved. So someone who is not fearful or has a good foundation to stand on is not going to be as perfectionistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but it must have been hard to get out of this perfection trap. It's not just having the realization and then changing the whole thing. I guess fear came up.
Yeah. And it's interesting, yes, it doesn't happen overnight. And just speaking for me, it did happen rather quickly because there was so much happening and I had to make these decisions about what do I value. And I was just at such a rock bottom with, all of the exercise and the food and trying to be perfect with my grades, that I just had this mental switch. And granted, it doesn't happen like that. For a lot of people, it is a process to let go of that perfectionism. But I guess I just got to the point where it was make it happen or just have it spiral even further out of control. And I was already feeling like I was in such a deep hole. I just didn't want to go any further.
Mm-hmm. And what was it that somehow changed your attitude? The old attitude that you had, that being ripped means healthy, or that somehow being thin means healthy and that six-pack abs is a sign of being healthy?
Yeah. When I was trying to dig myself out of that, I needed to find a way out of all that eating and exercise, and I wanted to stop the rules and all of that BS stuff to do with the whole cultural ideal of looking ripped. And the fact is, a six-pack of abs is not synonymous with health. It can be a far cry from it. And, at some point, I feel like I forgot how to eat without the rules. And, so I was going through my journey, and that's when I discovered intuitive eating. And it was just like this revelation. It showed me and told me, that yes, I can eat normally again, and how to rediscover my inner cues and my inner self. And I then read Linda Bacon's book on Haze, and
Health at Every Size, yeah.
Yeah, Health at Every Size. That just blew my mind. And basically, we could end the story there. We know now, I'm a hardcore Haze and non-diet advocate, but, there's still some juicy stuff. So I guess it was getting out of that diet land that I just needed to mentally get out of that. When I started uni, I guess I knew how much of a struggle that place was. And I think it was a guest of yours, Aaron Flores, he said he went to uni thinking, well, I can lose weight, that's what I'll help other people do. Never mind the fact that it's making it totally miserable for them, but I'll help them become miserable. And I just knew I just had to stop doing that. I mean, I had the support of my wife and all of my family. I was doing lots of reading around this. Brene Brown is amazing, and Dr. Rick Hausman, he wrote, If Not Dieting, Then What? And I guess, just through reading all these things and realizing that my self-worth was not tied to how I looked. That was what it came down to. And when I was able to come to that realization and accept that, my whole language changed. It changed from self-hatred to self-compassion. I just started to be gentler with myself. And I think that's something that people lack is, when they're in that space, is that gentleness.
Sounds like you had to really do some inner work as well, because that doesn't just happen.
It doesn't just happen, yeah. And it's a process. It's not some event that all of a sudden it's like totally, body positive. It is a process. And still even today, the cultural messages are everywhere. Body image, it's not a static entity. It's not still. It does ebb and flow because we still have experiences, every day that can change our perception of our physical appearance. And so when that's happening, I find that sometimes I have to realign my mind and just put things back into perspective. And that's when we need to use our resilience techniques. But I guess that's what makes us stronger and a better person, because I am continually working on my inner self. And I think that's part of growth and of evolving as a human, to work on ourselves.
Yeah, I found it really hard to trust all of what they said in the intuitive eating book, because I thought, this cannot apply to me. I know myself if I gave myself permission to eat. So I wonder how you experienced the whole transition.
Yeah, I guess I was just at that point where I thought, I've been in diet land for so long and so miserable that if I tried something else, surely it just couldn't be worse than what I was doing, and I needed something to free myself from, as you say, just in that prison, that diet prison. And it can take courage, just taking that step into the darkness when you can't see the light, right? It's that is being vulnerable. That's putting yourself out there and seeing where it takes you. But, I think that's part of engaging with your own story and taking charge of who you are and what you value. I really focused on my values throughout this whole time, because I think that's what kind of can set you straight, set you onto the path of where do you want to go. If you don't want to be here, well, where do you want to go? And I think if you ask yourself about your values and what you want in life and where you see yourself, I didn't see myself miserable in 10 years, so where did I want to go? Well, I knew where I wanted to go, and it was trusting in those tools such as intuitive eating and just taking that step.
Did you experience binges or somehow being out of control in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, there were obviously foods that I had just restricted for so long. But, I went through the process of bringing them back into the house. And yes, I ate, some of those foods until uncomfortable fullness. And because I had restricted for so long as well, Merit, the same time as letting go with the eating and starting to listen to my internal cues, I was still working on the body image stuff, but recognizing, like, I gained weight as all this process was unfolding. People always say, if I eat intuitively, will I lose weight? I mean, for me, I gained weight, but I accepted that because I knew it would take me to a place that was far healthier than where I was.
Out of the obsession mostly, right?
Out of obsession, yeah. And, my weight has now stabilized, but it was also just constantly tapping back to the fact that I knew that how I looked was it just didn't define me anymore. I had let go of that and untangled. That was a really big mess, and it can, for some people, myself included, it took a really long time to untangle the fact that my self-worth, it didn't ride on the way I looked.
Did you experience some grief when you had to let go of an ideal that you were holding on to?
Yeah, I mean, there's the typical fantasies that come along with, if I hit said weight, I will get this, get that. But in all reality, that never happened for me. I didn't get to said weight, and my world all of a sudden was like amazing. And so, yeah, it's letting go of that and then having to deal with the fact that I actually had to do the hard work, and that was all the internal stuff. And I went through the struggles of all the internal stuff. You do go through that grieving process because I had, I guess, hooked myself onto all of those, I will get this or I will get that for being at this weight for so long. I was hooked on it for so long. Letting go of that is really difficult.
Yeah, we have this idea that everything will be better once we lose weight or something. And then we get really depressed when it doesn't happen. I was kind of surprised. Why is happiness not here? I'm thin now. I'm totally obsessed and I've never been more unhappy. And I fit into the skinny jeans that I wanted to. But apart from that, I'm more isolated. I don't seem to be very healthy. I'm very obsessed. I'm not going to social gatherings. I don't allow myself this or that. And I exercise fucking compulsively. So I was like, why? Someone lied. They said, they said it was all going to be great. It's not. And at the same time, the fear of regaining the weight was at its height,
Yeah.
It's absurd. You get into a really vicious cycle there.
There's definitely that fear. Like, I guess all that time I spent in Dietland, it was that fear of I didn't want to live in a larger body again like I was when I was younger because I didn't want what came with it. All the teasing and all the stigma attached to it. And so, it is a fear, and letting go of that fear, I guess it's how you use the fear. Do you sit with that fear and just allow the discomfort to be there and then just carry that with your experience and actually get the evidence? Well, do things change as I, put weight on, if that's the case? I think you can use fear in different ways. The first way I used it for all those years kept me in a trap.
Yeah. And you're really onto something there, because I think when we get the urges to go back to dieting and over-exercising, and I really get them with a loud shrieking noise in my head, like my gremlin takes over all of my brain space, then it's either that or sitting with the uncomfortable feeling of not obeying that voice. And I fell into the trap thinking that I can do this intuitive eating stuff and letting go of the thin dream when the voice is not there. Because if the voice is that loud, I can't stand it. And I got taught that, no, the voice is not going anywhere. Yeah. It's you who has to be strong enough or courageous enough to try and sit with it and deal with it, not hoping for... I can do that once the voice is gone, or once the weight is lost, or once I have a relationship, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I totally understand people who have the same thinking that I had. Like, I can't do it now. It feels so terrible. I have to give in to the urges, which are basically very much comparable to all the other addictive urges we have. Like, I can't stand this uncomfortable feeling. I need to go shopping or drinking or working my ass off or trying to please everyone. It's all going into the same thing. Like, I have to do something to make this ickiness go away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were really, I mean, what a badass move. You were in your studies to become a dietitian, where you were basically surrounded by the total opposite messages of all that while you transitioned away from that?
Totally. It's just, I mean, Merit, I'm reading all of this stuff to do with HAES and non-dieting and connecting with amazing dietitians in Australia like, Fiona Sutherland and Fiona Willard, who are just such amazing people, right? But it was shitting me because at the same time, I was still being taught at uni, everything was still so weight-centric. Mm-hmm. I didn't get a single lecture on HAES or non-diet. Some universities in Australia do get exposed to that, but mine didn't. That was really difficult, and no one in my cohort was exposed to HAES and non-dieting, so I was like on this soul journey. Yes, yeah.
But I mean, why? I don't understand the study of dietetics and nutrition. There's this part that I really, really cannot understand. I heard from so many people that they were not taught the real science about why diets don't work and how to help clients improve their health without focusing on weight loss, and how detrimental it is to be eternally focused on weight loss. And also that eating disorders are not addressed in the education. How is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, we had a lecturer on eating disorders, an amazing senior eating disorder dietitian who I'm now actually working with. But yeah, it's just not touched on. And I think that it kind of leads to the, the challenge of, say, weight bias in the health profession. And I mean, I was chatting with a friend of mine just the other day, and she said she had been to her doctor and had some bloods done, and they were perfect. But at the end of the consultation, the doctor still said, you could still lose some weight. Mm. I mean, I think it's such a difficult situation. Like, doctors aren't immune from the cultural BS that everyone is fed as well. And unfortunately, then that bias shifts across to the patients too.
So we need to educate people.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the doctors then end up not following evidence-based practice when they're suggesting weight loss for all these ailments, and the patients cop the brunt of that, which is a shame. Yeah, I think there's some education needs to go on, and particularly around eating disorders. And look, granted, it's not all doctors. There are some doctors, who are aware of eating disorders, but there are some that aren't, and they don't know the signs and what to ask and what to look for. And I think that's a primary place to identify.
I so admire Fiona for, engaging in work to teach students of nutrition and dietetics to actually include those ideas. Yeah.
I mean, she's doing such amazing work, and I'm very grateful to have them both in Australia, and they are just so generous with their time and knowledge, and they're really amazing, both Fionas. So hopefully non-diet and HAES does get more exposure at the universities. I know Fiona's got like a presentation that can be shown at universities, so yeah, she's doing amazing work.
Yeah, and Evelyn Tripoli as well, I think. So there are ever more people, on this mission to blow up this harmful and untrue cultural belief that only thin people can be healthy, and that being over a quote-unquote normal weight inevitably means having bad health. So, coming to speak of that, what was it that turned you on to the body image movement? Because you and I are both official ambassadors of the body image movement.
Congratulations, my fellow BIMGA.
Yeah. Congrats.
And to you too. It's amazing. It's an awesome movement to be involved with, and I'm honoured. And
how did that come to be?
As I was doing my own self-work, I took a real interest in body image and, how it related to everything that had gone on in my world. And so I started to get into the body positivity side of things, and that's when I came across Taran and the body image movement. And So between that and Haze, I just felt like I was in my element, and I decided to host a screening of Embrace.
Fantastic.
If your listeners who haven't heard about it, I'm sure you have mentioned it. It's a social documentary about body image that was made by Taryn Bromford, an Australian lady, and her story. And
she tirelessly promotes this movie across the world. It's amazing what she does.
It is incredible. She's a true champion of the world. It's amazing what she's doing. And
so you hosted a screening?
I did. I hosted a screening on the Sunshine Coast, and I had a sellout crowd in the largest capacity cinema, which was 315 people.
Woo.
And it was amazing. It touched me how many women turned up and engaged in discussion, and there was tears, there was laughter, lots of aha moments, and, it was very empowering. And it was just so rewarding engaging with them all and the community to, just to raise the awareness around the body image issues. And so I applied to be a global ambassador and got accepted. And I think I'm actually the only male global ambassador, if I'm not mistaken. At my screening that I hosted, there were only 5 males. Which is a real shame. And granted, like, the Embrace is targeted towards women, but I think men can learn a lot from this movie, and I would just highly encourage males to see it. It is available on DVD now, for 2 reasons. And I think, firstly, to actually get a greater insight into what women experience with these issues, especially if they have a female partner. Because often I think if a female says to a male, I look this way or I look that way, a male will say, no, you don't. They don't mean to be dismissive, but those body image issues still exist, still internalised with the woman. So I think helping the men understand that it really can be a process to overcome that body image dissatisfaction would be really valuable for them. And secondly, males have body image issues too. Mm-hmm. And again, although it's targeted to women, I think it's still a good point of discussion and open that up to males as well. So
it is really important. I start to learn that so many men have issues with body image, be it that they want to be more muscly or more lean or whatever, but they have very similar struggles. Apparently, they seem to find it harder to talk about it. And I mean, I didn't talk about it forever either. But as you just said, with the movie that you hosted, the Embrace movie, sometimes it only takes one step to let others know, hey, you're not alone with this struggle. Yeah. That's why they turn up. That's why there are tears and laughter. That's the moment when you recognize, I thought it was all about me being flawed. I thought it was me being a mess. I thought it was me being out of control. But no, it wasn't at all. It's just the fact that we need to start talking about this that relieves so much of the shame already.
Absolutely.
And that's probably not the male strength, because they have this internalized, masculine ideal, probably.
Yeah, look, I mean, I never talked about this stuff with any of my male friends, and I don't know any of my male friends who do so with any of their other mates either. Yeah, it's, I guess, just that cultural thing, that's just not what men do. But you know what? That's bullshit. I'm sorry. That might be this cultural thing, but I'm standing out there now and saying that men don't have to buy into that. They don't have to buy into this social standing of men not being able to talk about how they feel. It's okay to talk about these things. It's like going to see someone, whether it's a psychologist or a counsellor, there's a bit of stigma attached to that. But I just think, well, if I'm going to see someone to help myself, to feel better, what's wrong with that? There's no shame in that. And it's the same, as talking about these issues with other people. If you don't talk about it, it will never get addressed, and it will just become harder and harder.
It's a sign of strength, actually. It's just that men don't recognize that. But by doing that, they will open themselves up more, be more capable of real connection, be it to their partners or be it to other males. But somehow, it must be the feeling of, I don't want to be the first one to step out of this closet.
Look, I mean, it is difficult to be male in that culture, and I've been putting a few things out there to try and raise the profile around male body image. As you know, like I've performed some poetic words, and recently I put a self-portrait online too, and I just think...
A nude one too, right?
A nude one too, correct? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
I didn't see it, unfortunately.
Look, I mean, it was part of a body confidence challenge that a friend invited me to participate in, and I thought, why not? It was like a 2-week challenge with different activities, and I think, why not? It's like I said, body image does not just remain static, and I think anything that will help me grow and challenge myself can only lead to great things. So I put myself out there, and one of the challenges was around getting naked, and not just taking some kind of naked selfie. It was being comfortable naked, and I did it really to challenge myself and as a way for continued self-exploration, and also to show that this is a male body and we come in many different forms, not just in the ripped form that you see in the ridiculous magazines.
Wow.
And, I think it can also help women as well by showing things like that. It's I think, under-acknowledged that men have these issues. So if what I do also helps women perhaps explore these issues with their male partners, if they have male partners, awesome. Because like we said, men can go on in silence and suffer, which is a shame. Like, I think the saying is, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yeah, the second arrow, right? We suffer and then we blame ourselves for it or shame ourselves for it, and thereby we give ourselves a second arrow into the wound. It's a good analogy, I think. And how did males react to your move?
I got some really positive comments around it. Lots of, I think you're courageous and you're a great role model, and I think that's flattering. And ultimately, I just want to help people and show them that regardless of our body size, that we're worthy of love, and of belonging, and that we can occupy space in this world. It doesn't matter what size we are. And it's like in... I still go to the gym because I do enjoy it, but now obviously time is very much reduced. But it's just that culture, there's teenagers there who, you hear the sayings go around, the curls get the girls, they're referring to their biceps. And like, I call them out now because they need to know that people of all sizes are in loving and meaningful relationships. The way you look will not determine that. And everyone will love you just for who you are. It's okay.
And that it is also a big money-making scheme behind it.
Oh, yeah,
that
absolutely.
Lives off of us feeling insecure and buying into all of that. That's the sad thing. We end up fighting each other and competing with each other. And like the third party, the big diet, big beauty, they kind of have a field day.
Oh, totally, and I listen to your podcast and your talk on consumerism and all of that, and it just rides on people's emotions, and it's disturbing.
It is. I was feeling really vulnerable to put that podcast out, the one about marketing literacy and permission and stuff, because I felt like maybe people don't want to hear this. They don't want to see behind all of this, because we've all bought into this for so long that it's actually painful to let go of that, because you have to realize that, oh my God, I think it's really painful to step back from, decades of some sort of behavior or belief, because that means realizing that I was wrong, or that I bought into the wrong thing, and that I might have spent a lot of time, wasting time by not enjoying life as fully as I could have. It's painful. So I was a bit vulnerable to put that one out, but I think people greatly appreciate it. And I do really have an interest to make people more critical of what they are consuming, and to, make them more self-empowered to make their own choices, because that's not something that we have been taught ever. On the contrary, this has been beaten out of us.
I love that you're talking about that and
Thank you.
getting it out there. And like you said, it's about being critical of these things. Like, I mean, I remember before I started studying to be a dietitian and I was doing photography, and I never ever photoshopped people. That was just never on my agenda. Yet I still looked at the magazines and bought into it. So it's just so easy to accept things on face value and not be critical.
Yeah, even if we know it, sometimes it's like, yeah, it might be Photoshop, but still.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, sometimes it's just
very deep.
Very, very deep and ingrained. And, when you're exposed to these things for just so many years, it can be difficult to dig out of that. But I think it's wonderful that raising the awareness and certainly the literacy around those things is so important. And I think really for young kids these days too, media literacy around photoshopping and all of that is really important, because kids as young as 4 and 5 are aware of all of these body image things. They get a sense of what is attractive and what they shouldn't look like at 4 and 5 years old.
It's terrible. And they're pretty defenseless against that because they've not fully developed at all. They cannot be critical of that. And it keeps coming at them from all angles nowadays with, our phones and iPads and social media. Yeah. It's pretty hard for a pristine hard drive of a kid not to be compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, if you don't mind me saying it. It's, "To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best to make you everybody but yourself means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting."
This is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's what we need to do, fight with our vulnerability and our critical thinking and our resilient skills, and not get attached to that diet land. The fighting is hard, but owning your story is a hell of a lot better.
And it's quite the journey to, pardon my French, unfuck our minds.
Oh, yeah.
They are trying to, as you said with your quote, they're trying to continuously, all the time, all day long, to re-fuck it, the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they're riding on, and it's a consumer-driven world, and yeah.
You're now working as a health at every size dietitian, as you said, and I really want to know, how do you deal with people? Let's say you're meeting a client for the first time, and they're coming to you with the idea that you're going to help them lose weight. How do you approach them or prepare yourself to approach them when you know that there might be this Chinese wall of resistance to the idea of letting go of their weight fixation?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult situation. Probably depending on the client, it may not be the first thing you want to talk to them about in the first consultation. And I think it's about bringing it back to self-care with the food. I think body image is attached with the eating behaviors. And I think to start with, addressing with starting to develop a good relationship with food again and become attuned to eating and doing it for self-care. And then, yes, that discussion of the weight loss at some point always will have to happen. And it can be really difficult for people. Of course, like I've experienced that myself. But I think it comes down to teaching them a bit of a different language as well when it comes to weight, and that language is self-compassion, becoming embodied and connecting their body and mind. And I think the body image work does need to be done ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And how do you explain to them how diets don't work so that they see that, yes, it might happen. Diets do work short term. That's the mean thing about them. But they do come at a high cost of, losing your freedom, becoming obsessed and having to count and having to say no to social gatherings, or losing control and binging.
And failure and getting anxious and depressed and lower self-esteem because you have failed the diet. And
yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, is that what you want?
How do you explain that to someone who's not familiar that diets do not really work and that they are not healthy? I mean, this diet binge cycle
Yeah.
They're usually not aware that this is all really
And I think
tied together.
it's about asking the client about their own experience and ask them what their history is with dieting, for example. And, you might get someone who says, I went on this diet and it worked. But then 6 months later, I went and did this one and it worked too in the short term, right? So it's about getting them to verbalize, well, did it actually really work? Helping them see that what they were doing was actually exactly the same. It's a diet under disguise, right? Just under a different name. But what they're doing is actually the same. The whole restriction, binge, put the weight back on, and if not, plus more. And it's actually helping them explore their history around that. Because while they might come to you not actually being embodied during those experiences, they don't actually recognize that what they were doing was dieting, that restriction. It's like calling it the lifestyle diet. People don't think it's a diet because they say it's a lifestyle change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what they're ultimately doing is if they're making a lifestyle change to lose weight, it's still a diet, weight loss.
It's going to fire back at one point.
Yeah.
But the main thing really is, all the things that I've tried, some of them have worked for quite a while. And of course, that reinforced my belief that this is the way I got to do it. And then when it stopped working, I tried to do it even more strict. And then I totally held myself hostage, and my life got really, really small. And I developed an eating disorder, but I wasn't really aware. I was just trying to hold on to some ideas that might have worked at one point, and I would defend that.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, because
it's like tunnel vision. You get tunnel vision on what works, and it's like, I like to say, it's like, let's say you want to buy a new yellow sports car, for example. Mm-hmm. When you go out on the streets, then all you end up seeing is yellow sports cars.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the pink elephant. Don't think about the pink elephant. Well, all you do is think about the pink elephant, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the same happens in our culture, is that a culture obsessed with thinness, someone who's obsessed with thinness, that's all they see, right? So the fact is, we live in a size-diverse world. But, when you're obsessed with thinness, that's what you focus on, and that's all around you. So
and it becomes the main point of determination what you're worth. Yeah. I don't know if I put that in the right words language-wise, but that becomes what defines your worth.
Yes. You chase that thinness because, that's going to make me worthy, that's going to make me fit into society, and I'll get what's attached to that thinness, which is, success and love and happiness, right? But we know that's not true.
No. It isn't. And have you been successful when you talked to people and tried to open up their minds? Did people react in a positive way as well?
Yeah, so I've only just started to see clients in the private practice. So I haven't had to explore that with a client yet, although I do with peers, like as we are now, right, as a way to challenge and kind of be prepared for that. The conversation will certainly happen with a client in the very near future, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. How do you address our real problem of weight stigma out there? How can we change that people are being discriminated against for their weight and our internal fat phobia as well? How can we start and tackle that?
Activism, and lots of activism, and I think there's like amazing people, who are doing things around that. Virgit Tovar and Marilyn Wan and, a lot of people, and it's a shame that we live in a world where stigma exists, and I think it's also, as an individual, we can speak up when we see or hear it.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that is activism as well, so that listeners know that we don't need to be the activists tying ourselves onto some billboard. And, it's not that sort of activism, but the small things when we can raise our voice and say, this is not okay.
Yeah, if someone's not comfortable to get onto the political stage or the social media stage, it just might be at that personal level with someone that you experience it in day-to-day life. And speaking up. And I think that's just where it starts, just raising awareness at that level and with those around you, in your community. And not everyone, like I said, is comfortable to get and shout it from the rooftop, but it's to do what you can do.
Yeah.
And put your foot forward on that level that you're comfortable at.
Yeah, and the smallest step counts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just another side question. How has your judgment of other people's bodies changed over time?
Really interesting question. I mean, because I judge my body so harshly, I was comparing myself to everyone else.
Yeah, me too.
And as I started to accept my own body, that comparison, I guess, dissipated. And now it's just they are who they are, as I am who I am. And again, you still have to realign your mind on occasion because of the cultural messages, but just being very gentle with yourself. And I think if ever something comes into mind, it's about just acknowledging that and be curious about, okay, why did I just have that judgment? Because it can happen. Was I just exposed to something that changed my perception? Like what's going on in my world that I'm translating something else onto this? Or, I think being curious about it. But in general, when I stopped comparing, I realized, well, not only am I not defined by what I look like, but nor is anyone else.
Have your views changed of women's bodies as well?
I think like a greater appreciation for what, I guess, the evolution of the female body through the life cycle. By doing like all the body image movement stuff and talking to the women and just getting that appreciation and hearing their experiences of their life journeys and how their bodies have changed. Because as a male, like, it's very difficult to understand that because we'll never experience the changes that a woman's body goes through. We're very different in that sense. So, yeah, I just appreciated it a great deal more. And one particular group, I think, is pregnant women and like the pressures that they experience. I think is insane, the social pressure for them, like to after a baby to lose all this weight to get back to before you had a baby. And it's like, well, they just gave birth to a baby, which is a miracle in itself. It's like amazing. Our bodies are amazing. And there's this pressure to lose weight. It just,
Crazy.
Boggles the mind sometimes. It is crazy. Yeah. I think just it's really important to engage with women for me and hear about those experiences. That just makes me the wiser. And I think it's important just to connect with them and listen.
Yeah, that's what I think. More empathy and less judgment.
Yeah.
What are your current goals with the body image movement and with your work?
Yeah, so I've just got this dream job, and I air quote that because I'm just so passionate about doing it and I love this space. So the private practice is dedicated to working with clients with eating disorders, disordered eating, weight and body image concerns. And I guess the goal is where I'm located, there's a real gap in services in treating eating disorders and disordered eating. So, a lot of education and awareness raising around these issues. Which I'm really excited about. I really enjoy engaging with people and doing the education side of things. So yeah, hopefully some very positive things there. And as part of my role as a global ambassador for the body image movement, I'm doing a project with the uni where I just graduated from to run a screening of Embrace on campus. So it's like a joint collaboration with the public health program, and it's essentially going to be a community event, and all of the local high schools are going to be invited. And it's like this open air cinema, twilight screening under the stars.
Oh, in summer.
Yeah. I mean,
slightly envious here.
And I think it really, will be huge. And I've actually invited Taran to come as a keynote speaker. So I'm waiting to get the word back as to whether she can make it or not. So that would be quite amazing. And then, in terms of other goals, another side project is, I'm really passionate about photography and imagery, and I'd really like to see a greater representation of, and I put, air quotes, plus or curve models. We're just exposed to images of models that represent 1 to 2% of the population, if it's really 0% attainable because they're Photoshopped. So for a lot of people, it can cause negative feelings and anxiety about body image. And I just want to see more imagery that represents the real world.
And you can produce it.
And I can produce it. And I'm actually in discussions with a modeling agency in Australia that supports this as well, which is actually really Amazing, yeah. And hopefully we're going to collaborate on a campaign next year. And so watch this space. I'm really hoping that will change things, because one thing that I would like to see happen is the abolishment of what we call in Australia, I don't know what the title is kind of elsewhere, but it's the headless fatty, right? We see
yes.
Yeah, the images in media, right, where you have people in a bigger body, no heads, and typically doing some kind of unhealthy behavior, which is just such a misrepresentation of this population group. It's just, it's one of those things
that's so mean. And they say that they want to protect their identities because, they would be bullied or something, when in fact they make them headless, like you don't deserve to be here, and they get represented miserable, stuffing their faces or lying in a giant pizza, or just it's disgraceful.
It is disgraceful, and I really would like to see something happen about that. And so I'm going to put some energy into that project next year. I think changing the way people see people in a larger body, it needs to happen, and it's not right. There's no other way to say it, but that headless fatty in the media is just not right.
No, it's not.
So hopefully get some traction there, Merritt.
Dan, you're amazing. We need more men like you out there doing this stuff, especially because you're a man. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel honored that we are connected, and I really want to let people know where they can find you if they want to work with you or reach out with questions.
Inner Self Revealed, so www.innerselfrevealed.com.au. And I've got the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/innerselfrevealed. And my new work with the private practice, FMB Wellbeing, is foodmindbody.com.au.
I will put them in the show notes. Good. The last question to you, and you know it well probably. Yeah. What would you like to be remembered for?
So last week, Merritt, I was watching a movie called Concussion, and very briefly, it's a film based on a true story of a pathologist who uncovers the truth about brain damage suffered by American football players. So this pathologist, his heritage is from Nigeria, and he has a tribal name, and it translates to, if you know, you must come forth and speak.
That's the tribal name?
That's the translation of the tribal name.
Okay.
And so, I had just posted that self-portrait on social media, and that meaning, it just totally resonated with me. And so that's what I want to be remembered for is, for speaking up, for sharing my story, being vulnerable, and being me.
Wonderful. Go ahead. Go ahead and do just that. It's the best mission to be on.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I'm honored to have been invited to be a guest on your podcast, and you've had some amazing and wonderful guests in the past, and to share this space with you. And I'm so glad to be a part of your world, and you are doing such amazing things with Life Unrestricted, and very inspiring. Thank you for having me, Merritt.
Oh, thank you. And really, likewise, with all that you said. And I'm equally honored. And it's always so good to talk to people from all over the world and seeing that this net is thickening and that we can really change something. So sure. I'm equally happy to have had this discussion. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Merritt.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.